All right. So yeah, we will go ahead and get started. I am here with Drew Lichtenstein, ninth best Star Wars card player in the world, according to Joel Olson's list.
I don't know. Count the vote.
Yeah. So I mean, and I will ask you about your actual history, but I am actually kind of curious about like how it feels to be on a list like that.
I don't know. It feels awkward, I guess might be the right word, to be honest. I actually voted in the first time the list that Joe did, the first time he did it a few months ago, and I actually didn't put myself on it. And when I didn't put myself on it, Joe like sent me a message. He's like, I was trying to tabulate everything, and I was thrown off by the fact that there was a list without you on it, and I realized it was you who didn't put yourself on it, and I was like, I just feel weird, man. Like, I don't know how to describe it. Like, I mean, I do have some confidence in my playability. So, I do feel like I'm a decent player, but it's just very hard to comparatively rank people in Star Wars.
Right.
I mean, I'm confident. I think I've lost to every single person in the other 24 people in that top 25 list. So it feels weird to say, oh, I'm better than number 23 because I've lost to number 23 before.
Right.
So I don't know.
Well, they may have lost to you though. Too,
yeah.
So.
I mean, probably, but like still, it's kind of
yeah.
But it's fun. I mean, it's not quite my cup of tea, but I know people really enjoy it. And it's funny because I mentioned it sometime to Mike Kessling. We were talking about it. I was like, yeah, I don't know. I don't feel right doing the rankings. He's like, it's the closest thing we have to ratings. And, ratings were like something people really cared about, back in the 90s. And it's kind of fun to have that back. But yeah, awkward. I would say I feel awkward.
Yeah. Okay. Good to know. Good to know that you feel like that. Personally, I would say I've come around on it. Mostly because I think that he does a good job presenting it.
Yeah.
And using it as a way to celebrate players rather than a way of excluding people or like even, I mean, there's a little bit of like, should this person have been number 4 or number 5 or whatever, which I don't love, but like most, I don't know. I felt like mostly that kind of thing should be about celebrating.
Agreed.
Celebrating the winners, not necessarily, there wasn't I'm glad that there's not somebody that did a response and was like the five players that should have been on Joe's list or whatever.
I really like it because 1, the community gets involved, and 2, it does highlight people who like aren't necessarily winning majors, but are doing like consistently well. And like, there's not, in other like larger games, there's ways to do that. But like, someone like a Brad Kipple who goes like 10-2 in every OCS, but like just can't travel to majors. Like it's fun that there's a way to kind of acknowledge
right
those people who are really kind of,
or even people, somebody who goes to every major but finishes 10th.
Right.
That's definitely something to think about. And I mean, 25 players seems like a lot, but then once you actually try to, write them down, you run out of players fast. So
I mean,
it is a cream of the crop list. It's not like, I mean, that's where I have a little, that's where I don't like the fantasy drafts.
Right.
Because it goes down all the way down the list, like basically saying,
like, this person's worth 5 points.
This person's worth 5 points. Yeah.
I feel that. I also don't do the fantasy drafts.
Yeah, and
But the reason I don't do the fantasy drafts is because, again, I would always want to pick myself, but I would feel awkward picking myself every time, so I'm not going to. And, but I don't like betting against myself, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. So. You really don't want to bet against yourself.
Right.
Yeah,
I don't want to bet against myself. So I don't know. But it's, again, people enjoy it, right? So it's fun.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mean, and I can mostly opt out of it. It's just like not the best the week before a major for me to click on the thing and see that I'm predicted to finish dead last.
You're better than you beat me like last month. I distinctly remember, or 2 months ago.
I think I remember. I've gotten some wins against players like you, but it's always when it's a very lopsided matchup. Like I think
it was super close. You were playing Bring Him, I was playing Rescue the Princess, and I remember I put Uncontrollable Fury on your Vader, and you won by like 3. It was like a super close. It was a great game.
Right. No, it was a great game, but I would say Bring 'Em Before Me versus Rescue the Princess. Bring 'Em Before Me is pretty heavily favored in that.
It's favored. It's favored, but you gotta
it
play.
It was also like the second time that I'd ever played against that Rescue the Princess deck. So but yeah, that Uncontrollable Fury, and I just couldn't. And you were hanging out at the garbage.
I kept like putting people back in the garbage to get away from Vader.
Yeah. That was a wild game. You definitely made me win it, whether it was a lopsided matchup or not. You made me work for it. So let's go back to the beginning and ask the first question for everybody. What got you started with Star Wars cards?
Yeah, so I actually originally started playing the Star Trek card game in 1994 when it first came out. I was 7 years old. I was a big fan of Star Trek. It was the first show I remember watching with my mom, Star Trek: The Next Generation, in the basement of the house I was born in. And so so I was already into Star Trek. Really was into that game, following strategies. Kind of they had like a strategy book they put out with the premiere set, and like the nascent Decipher forums. Really first exposure to kind of online culture was doing stuff with the Star Trek card game. And then a couple years later, a friend of mine who we were kind of on these divergent paths where I was clearly becoming like the gaming nerd, and he was becoming kind of, a baseball player and that type. He had gotten the Star Wars 2-player intro game and just gave it to me. He was just like, I'm not interested in this, and you can have it, basically. I'd never seen Star Wars. I didn't really know Star Wars movies or, any of the stuff related to it. But I just kind of over one weekend opened it up and kind of played against myself, basically, kind of learn the rules as much as someone, a 10-year-old can do, basically. And so that was right around the time of, I think, Hoth or Dagobah. So when I had been going to card game stores to look for Star Trek cards, because I wasn't really playing Star Trek with people either, I was just buying cards and building decks. I'd seen some Star Wars singles. I distinctly remember seeing like Commander Luke Skywalker and the Executor, like in a case, like in the plastic cases with the prices. And then since I was so involved in like this Decipher website for Star Trek, I started to look at the Star Wars stuff more and got really excited for Cloud City. And distinctly remember that like Cloud City was like pushed back by months. Like it was supposed to come out, and then like Decipher was kind of infamous for not hitting its release targets or whatever. And so got really excited for Cloud City and bought a bunch of Cloud City. Bought a bunch of packs. Was really excited for it. And then basically through Cloud City, Jabba's Palace and Special Edition, just bought packs, was building decks, and then around that time I started going to tournaments and card game stores. There was like a pretty active local scene. To plug the Kessling run, Mike Kessling talks all about the Atlanta Magic scene in much more detail than I would be involved, because actually, I was a couple years younger than most people, so I mean,
it sounds like you were like 10 years old.
Yeah, I was about that time. When this be? Yeah, 11. Yeah, when Special Edition came out and was playing. And so, but, I was building my own decks. I distinctly remember I really enjoyed playing hidden base X-Wings with S-foils. I liked intruder missiles and slight weapon malfunctions in my space decks there too. And then I think, so Star Trek was still really much like the primary game for me. So Star Trek was a game where I was like borderline competing. I guess as much you can be a wonder kid with a silly out of print game. I should have probably applied myself to Magic or chess or something, but it was Star Trek. And so like I was talking to people, building really competitive Star Trek decks. I was traveling to like Origins and Gen Con originally with my dad. And then as I got a little bit older, I went with people like Mike and the Atlanta group to play Star Trek, because there wasn't actually local Star Trek tournaments. There eventually would be some, but mainly I would just go to like large events a few times a year. But so I was getting into Star Wars kind of simultaneously with Star Trek, and then I would say by Indoor, I was really into Star Wars, really building decks, and I really enjoyed Reflections 2 and Death Star 2, because those sets to me kind of brought the game more to a level that I was interested in. Like I remember I hated inserts, I hated all the cheese. Like even then, like as I wanted decks to be, for lack of a better term, I wouldn't say clean, but I wanted them. I hated playing stuff that either you had a counter for and it got beat or they didn't have a counter and you won. Like I liked developed game states basically. Like I really liked Hunt Down. I liked Brigham. I was trying to remember what Light said. I liked Watch Your Step after Reflection Seed came out. But I was never like I was attending all the local tournaments, but I was never, playing competitively in the sense of like I wasn't like going to, the money tournaments or worlds for Star Wars. I was going for worlds for Star Trek. And then I quit around Tatooine. I hated pod racing. Like I hated, I thought the game was kind of coming out of that, and then it like went right back into it basically. And then kept playing Star Trek until they lost that license. I played Lord of the Rings for about a year, and then during Lord of the Rings, we were at the gaming store where we met a bunch of people who were playing Magic. Got into Magic. Really was focused on Magic for a long time. Played in a couple Pro Tours for Magic. Like that was kind of my game, basically through my 20s, and then came back to Star Wars basically during the pandemic, like so many other people, right? So Star Wars was always previously kind of a secondary or even tertiary game for me. Again, I would show up at the events and I'd play decks, but it doesn't quite have the same like original nostalgia for me that like if I were to go back and play Star Trek, which I briefly looked at and probably won't ever do, did. But it was kind of my first foray into like a local gaming community was through Star Wars because Star Trek didn't have those local tournaments, and then from Star Wars I got into Lord of the Rings, and then from Lord of the Rings got into Magic, and then took a very long hiatus, and then in 2020, like so many other people, I was stuck inside in China, because of the pandemic, was able to get back into it, and I had a good leg up to get back into it in 2020. One, because Mike was part of the infamous New Allies team, right? So I was basically my best friend, so I was able to quickly get back into a team. And then also, obviously, I knew what Star Wars was, and as I'd mentioned, when I had been playing, I'd always cared about what was competitive in the sense that, like, I never considered myself a casual player. Like, I had no problem, like, net decking. Like, I wanted to always be playing what I thought was the best deck. I just wasn't quite good enough with them. But my kind of gaming skills have been sharpened after playing Magic for basically 15 years in between. And then I knew what Star Wars cards were. So it was kind of very natural to kind of get back into it.
Yeah, I remember kind of getting into Star Wars cards after I played Magic for a few years and like seeing, first of all, like it's like there are things that just are different, like and it just does not carry over. But then there are other just like kind of concepts that apply to every game, like card advantage is a thing no matter what.
Yeah, and I think Magic, it's actually even more stark. Like in Magic, you talk all the time about 2-for-1s. Any removal spell that kills 2 creatures or anything that lets you draw 2 cards is like explicitly, clearly good. And in some ways, I think in Star Wars, we almost, I wouldn't say it makes us lazy, but like it's a little bit more gray area because of our ability to keep drawing cards. But then we do have clear card advantage. Like something like Ray is such clear card advantage.
Right.
That I think Magic actually heightens your realization of the importance of card advantage.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I think that the other thing that has been a recent, like, this occurred to me, and it's something that you 100% think about in Magic is like filtering out your deck. In Magic, you pull out your lands, not just so that you can have access to the resources, but so that you can then more consistently draw into your creatures.
Right. It's interesting because like in Magic, you would never play a 61st card, right? Like whereas in our game, you would be thrilled to have a 61st card for lots of reasons.
Right. Yeah. But like, the most like stark example of this is Court with Lady Proxima.
Yeah.
Like you play Court and you get into a late game. I noticed this, I'd be getting into a late game state, having Proxima out all game. And you get to a point where you kind of are missing your Proxima pulls and you're like, that's too bad. And then you go into battle and you draw 2 Twi'lek Advisors for Destiny. Right. And your opponent's like, I thought Court was supposed to have bad battle Destiny. But
and that kind of brings that's a great example of why I still love this game more than any other games I've played. Star Trek was super flawed. I don't need to hear about it, but Star Trek, even though that was kind of the game that I was really the most into when I was a kid, has major design flaws. And Magic even, so everyone knows about Magic having Mana Screw, Mana Flood. But even good games of Magic have pretty high variance in the sense that like top decks will end up mattering a lot. In fact, just this weekend I was playing a great game with a great game of Magic with a buddy of mine using something called a battle box. Long story short, battle box is no variance with lands, but you're still drawing off the top. And we got to like a really great board state, and he played like a really big flyer, and I top decked an answer to his flyer. Right. Our game is really special because that sort of variance is much, much lower. By like, first of all, obviously we have much less variance when it comes to something like a Mana Flood, Mana Screw. Most decks pull their activation. If not, you have pullers for them. Debatable, whether or not that's a good thing. But the main thing is that by like the middle of the game, you've seen so many cards that it's not becoming a thing. It's like, oh, I hope I get lucky to draw this thing I need. Not saying there's not luck. There is luck. There's obviously Destiny luck. We've also been, you can imagine you're playing against like Y4O and you have Search and Destroy, but you just can't draw it. I mean, that happens, but it happens far less than like in Magic. And like, you're much more able to kind of set up. Our game is much closer to chess than it is poker, while still having interesting variation so that no two games are the same.
Yeah.
Right.
That's actually really interesting because I actually think that is I actually see that as a weakness. Because the thing about, I mean, the one card game you haven't mentioned so far is Yu-Gi-Oh,
which I never played actually.
But Yu-Gi-Oh is, I mean, I know the version of the game that they play on the anime. I don't know if that actually lines up with the real thing, but like Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh has the you draw a card at the beginning of the turn.
Right.
And I think that not from a competitive standpoint, but from like from a drama standpoint, because I like my games to tell a story, there is really something to, and they do this really well in the TV show. He says, there's only one card in my deck that can get me out of this scrape. I got to trust in the heart of the cards, and he inevitably draws the card he needs, or he draws like a different card that then he has to adjust to. But it's like every time at the beginning of your turn, it's like a new thing. And I think that's a weakness to Star Wars CCG, at least in the sense of just the base game. Now, Proxima happens early in the turn. Ray happens whenever you want to. Emperor Returned happens whenever you want to. So you can't. So there is a little bit of that where you can do like, what can I find the card that I want? But it is an interesting distinction.
Yeah, and I think because it doesn't have that, like, it does make it a much higher skill game. And so you're right? Like, the less variance a game has, the more skill it is, right? You can obviously see the difference between chess and poker. Poker does have tons of skill, but there's still lots of variance, whereas chess is a completely variant-free. And I think because every other game I've had feels like it has a decent amount of variance, it's really interesting to get deep into a game that has less of it, basically. More being able to control your own fate or whatever. Like it's Star Wars has more like matchups. So every competitive card game, constructed card game is going to have meta games. But Star Wars more so than Magic or Star Trek or Lord of the Rings or any other game I've played. Like if a good player is on a deck versus a bad matchup, has a better chance of winning than traditionally in Magic, where if I can't think of the right example off the top of my head, but a pure combo deck versus a pure control deck, the pure combo deck is just not going to win. It requires the pure control deck. It's only going to win when the pure control deck has bad variance. Unlike in Star Wars, where like we were starting at the beginning, Bring Before Me versus Rescue the Princess. Rescue the Princess can win because the Rescue the Princess player outplayed the Brigham player, and that doesn't happen nearly as much in other games.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. And I mean, the other thing is now that I'm like talking through it, I guess where the drama occurs in Star Wars is that the game is complicated enough that two great players could be playing against each other, and even though it's not a matter of and then it's not a the drama is not did I draw the card that I need, it's did I see the opening
exactly
that I needed, which I guess happens more and more as I develop as a player.
Yeah, and it's just it's less like viscerally exciting, right? Because it's not like, ooh, here's the card I need, and it's more, it's methodical, as in like you're thinking out a couple of turns in advance, and it doesn't necessarily show itself. But like those best matchups are when those top players are like in game shifting what they're doing, basically.
Yeah, or like I'm working with my buddy Travis on getting him better at the game, and he had a realization at nationals where he was not happy with his performance, but one of the realizations that he had about his play is that he just doesn't even think about the move phase.
Yeah.
So he's like, so there are games, and this is the simplified version of it. He's playing against somebody else and they're duking it out at a system, and it gets into the late game. His opponent's all in on space. He's got a little bit of a drain on the ground, and then and a space presence, but he's not going to win in space. And because he wasn't thinking about movement, he just fought as long as he could in space and then lost the game. But what he could have done instead, and that's where that like aha moment is like, oh, okay, I don't need to keep fighting.
Right.
I can just move away.
Right.
So we're working on him seeing that kind of stuff, and I think
it's getting out of the linear mindset, right?
Right.
And I think the step going from a good player to a great player is that a good player does learn lines, right? Like there is, the basic, like if I'm playing this deck in this matchup, I should do this, right? I mean, your classic examples, like if you're court versus old allies, you should probably not deploy your Null Hutta so you can really fight them on just their one system. That's what a good player does. The next level as a great player is sort of like, well, how does old allies shift in that matchup? Right. So if I'm old allies and I know my court opponent's going to do this, what's my counter line? Well, the counter line for old allies is to go really fast, right? It's to like deploy Ray and fly up on turn one because court can't fight Ray on the ground, so you can try to threaten battle plan damage. Okay, back to court. What does court now do? Right, Ray's coming out turn one. They're satisfying battle plan turn one. Right, it's that back and forth of adapting what you should do. But what's good about the game is that it's still a card game in the sense that your opening hand has variation, right? So you can't just be like, I'm going to do the same thing every single time, because you might activate your 2-0. Okay, whoops, you activate your 2-0. Now what do you do to adjust, right? That's
right. You have to, I mean, court, you get your it's your first turn and you didn't get I didn't get barrier or stunning leader.
Right.
Should I deploy Jabba or not?
Yep. What's tricky about a lot of this is you only play that one game once, and it's like, well, percentage-wise, this should be the right thing to do.
Right.
But then if your opponent throws out an EPP turn one against your Jabba when you didn't have the protection, you're like, oh no. But like, it's the classic example, like in poker. You got aces and you go all in, your opponent called you a 2-7 and they hit, full house or whatever. It doesn't mean what you did was wrong. It's just, the outcome was poor.
The other thing, you mentioned EPP on Jabba, and this has been happening to me like more often than it should have. But I play somebody carelessly and get beat down, and I peel 7, but they just if they played an EPP on Jabba, and I do the math, maybe they didn't draw very good Battle Destiny or something, and then I don't draw Destiny,
right?
Then I can counterbeat.
Yep.
And this time I have I deployed Jabba I got all my activation out. I deployed Jabba from reserve deck, so I got 8 cards in hand. They're all aliens,
right?
And you didn't have enough to cancel Scum.
Right. It's
So,
it's seeing that other line basically.
yeah.
Right.
And just and being willing to, and because the game is so long, being willing to not just give up if something bad happens early.
That's a big thing too, is I think, and I think this kind of goes with any successful game, is not letting yourself get like frustrated. Like, you can come back. I mean, I have both come back from things like that and also lost after being on the other side, right? Where you feel like you're ahead and then you blow it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we play a pretty unforgiving game in the sense that like minor mistakes add up pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that also does mean that if you take a blowout early on, your opponent might make some mistakes later and let you get back in it. Right.
Yeah, the one time that I beat Brian Fred, and I played against him a decent number of times because he's in Indianapolis, and that's one of the main places I play in person. The one time I beat it, he came down with Anakin Padawan against Jabba turn 1.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, just Anakin doesn't have a lightsaber, so he did not zero Jabba's forfeit. So he draws he draws destiny, and I just forfeited Jabba, who covered it, and then I counterbeat, and he ended up peeling 6.
Nice.
And that mistake, like, we were neck and neck the rest of the game.
Right.
So that mistake, that's always, it's an interesting thing. It's so hard. Sometimes it's so hard to come back in this game.
I know it can feel like an uphill climb, but at the same time, I've had enough experiences blowing games that I know it can be done.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that I've had enough games where I was winning and then I was like, how did I lose? That you can be on the other side of it.
I've definitely noticed as I've played more and more top players where I can hold my own against them, that like I'll be up, I'll have 25 cards and they'll have 10 cards, and I'll have the board, and I'll have the board state and everything, and they don't scoop.
Yeah.
They play it, maybe not all the way to the last card, but until it's very clear that there is no path to victory. Whereas a lot of lower level players will, you blow them out on turn 3 or something, and then they just move on with their day. Of course, It's also different. It's also different if it's just a random casual game versus if it's like at an event or something. I only play against good players at events. Okay. So let's get back to the interview. Well, no, I mean, we're just talking Star Wars cards. That's what it's about, I
love talking
Star Wars. But I'm wondering about your, more of your story. So you said you got back into things in 2020, and now it's only, and how quickly did you get into design from there?
Yeah, so I started in design at the beginning of 2022, so a little more than a year ago.
Okay, so you lived the dream. You came back to the game and you said, I got some ideas, and they said, come in.
That's not exactly how it worked. What happened was that so I was playing a lot in 2020. I mean, it was literally, I was playing for hours a day, more than I would ever be playing now. But part of what I was playing a lot was playtesting. So this is really when they first started putting playtesting on GIMP. And it was basically around that time in 2020. I think they just started it before the pandemic, but obviously the pandemic accelerated the desire to put playtesting on GIMP. And I was super active in playtesting. Played at least a couple games. Played as much as I could, wrote reports. And so I was really involved in that way. And it just basically kind of happened that in early 2022 they had an opening. I had just won a major, and I've been playing a lot. And with those playtesting feedback I've been given, Chris basically reached out to me and said, we have an opening. A couple people have recently left D&D. You seem really involved and interested, obviously, because of your playtesting results. We, if you're interested, we'd like to have you on. And I said, for better or worse, I said sure, and joined the D&D team. So yeah,
that's awesome. And then since then you've been, I can tell, since then I feel like you've actually kind of stepped into what Chris Kelly used to do, whereas like somebody will complain about a card and then you'll come in and give like a really thought out response.
So I've tried to do that a little less. I did that a lot at first. So whenever I take on a responsibility, like something like D&D, I really want to put my whole heart into it. Like I don't like feeling like people are relying or waiting on me and not delivering. Um, and so certainly on behind the scenes, Chris kind of teases me a decent amount about this, but I reply to every single thing anyone posts in like the D&D forums. I'm always bumping stuff up. I'm always trying to, contribute. I'm not even like, I hope, and I don't think I come off as trying to like dominate ideas, but it's like if someone posts something, I want to give them feedback because I assume if someone posted a card, they want someone else to say what they think of the card, right? That's kind of the system that we have is that, and so I do contribute a lot there. Regarding your astute comment about me replying to people, part of that I thought was I felt a responsibility in the sense of like, as a member of D&D, I want to communicate with, I want to communicate with the community, basically. I want to, I represent people who make the cards and people have thoughts about the cards, and I want to be able to say that we're listening, right? I think more I realize that you don't need to tell someone you're listening, you can just listen, right? And so when people, maybe complain about something or say they don't like something, I can respond, and sometimes I do, but also I think it's good to step back and just let people say what they're feeling and take that into consideration when we're doing D&D, when we're designing cards. And also, honestly, sometimes I do agree with them. But, as a member of D&D, you want to kind of air your dirty laundry in the sense of
Right.
course, we're not monolithic on D&D. We do have different ideas of what we like. And so I would only reply to maybe defend something, but even then, I've kind of been doing it a little less.
Mm-hmm. Well, I always feel like you come in with very, like, at least, I mean, agree or disagree when you do come in with stuff. Then it's it's always well thought out. And respectful. Yeah, and I think as far as like people complaining, like for me, I don't mind when people complain about cards. I mean, obviously I'm not involved in D&D, but where I get, as long as they're actively engaged in the community otherwise, and like I know that they're actually, playing the card, they're actually playing in the game, the game. They're not just, when somebody that because it's a small enough community that there's a difference between like a name that you recognize and a name because you run into on Gemp all the time, and a name that you've never seen before, saying something that is often less informed. Because I mean, I will tell you, I mean, you obviously, because you're always there, but if I'm playing, I mean, it hasn't actually happened in a while because I feel like Master Luke isn't everywhere, but like, I mean, also I just haven't been playing court as much. I've been done with court for a little while, because of where it's at in the meta. Like, not a criticism or anything. It's just not been good for a little while.
Yeah.
It's a lot. You're allowed to have bad matchups, but like there were a string of games where it was like I just feel like Master Luke does 700 different things.
Sure.
And I remember, it's like I remember that he does this, and I remember that he does this, and then I'm playing around it, and then I'm like, oh, but I forgot that he makes all my aliens cost full price on Tatooine too.
Yeah, my thing about complaints, as you will, it was something I had to kind of learn to handle when I joined D&D, because like I wouldn't say I took each one personally necessarily, but, and I think this is just the nature of these things. You hear a lot more complaints than people saying that they're happy with stuff, right? But that's just the nature of it, right? When people are happy with stuff, they just play the game, right? They don't necessarily like come to gush about like, oh, I'm just having the best experience playing this. But so I was taking every complaint as like a thing I needed to address because like, we're a small community, and if some people are unhappy about stuff and they leave, then we've got attrition and people are leaving the game. And, like I felt like I needed to kind of like, my way to contribute would be like, no, the thing you're complaining about, think about it in a different way. It's actually not as bad, but like, it's not how it works.
No, attrition is good. Immunity to attrition is the problem with the game right now.
Yeah. But so I've kind of stepped back and realized that like people's complaints are people's complaints, right? And some of them are, I want to hear all of them, right? And just take it in. And when we develop sets, weigh what people are saying as, that's a good point. We should, adjust this deck to be better, or this, tune this deck down. Or, what, I don't agree with that. What do other people think? But not to take the complaints as like a existential crisis for the game, which is kind of the way I initially approached it.
It's also just that I don't know. I feel like because there is some ownership in the community, because your voice can actually be heard and actually change something. I think a lot of people focus, like if they're losing games, they assume that it's because it's a problem with the game. It's not a problem with their gameplay. And sometimes a lot of it gets frustrating for me when the discussion, if too much of the discussion used to be on the forums or on Slack or something like that is speculating about how we can make the game better, as opposed to celebrating the game as it exists and sharing like ideas for how actually improving myself as a player. And there's a place for everything, but it seems like it's more. But then again, I guess people complain about everything that Wizards of the Coast does too. So
I think the thing that's a little bit different there, and it's funny, actually one of my good friends works at D&D for Magic, and and this is not to be like, oh, woe is me, poor Drew, he gets to design cards for a game that he loves or whatever. But it's an interesting like position to sit in, being on D&D, being a competitive player, and being a member of the small community, right? Like there's no distinction between that, in the sense that they all kind of bleed together. And so sometimes like the hat I wear as D&D is the same hat I'm wearing as like a member of the community, and like just kind of how those things sort of meld together. Like my buddy who works in D&D at Magic is not allowed to play competitive Magic, and certainly doesn't interact with the millions of people posting on Reddit about Magic or whatever, right? Like he keeps a distance there, because they literally have like survey feedback that they look at for stuff like that. So it's just an interesting spot at times, but I mean, overall, the D&D experience has been super positive. I really enjoyed being on it. Enjoyed opportunity to be creative and have these conversations.
Okay, I'm gonna. So this guy Zach that's in my local group. He's literally just started the game less than 6 months ago.
Very cool.
And he asked me a question that I gave him a kind of half-ass answer to it. But he says, so if the people who are in charge of D&D with Star Wars cards are top players, what stops you guys from, if you're doing well with a deck, keeping that deck good and not stagnating things just so that you can, and manipulating things so that your pet decks are the best in the meta?
I think the first thing would be that there's 6 of us on D&D, right? So there's no one individual power to just be like, you know what, we're going to keep this one deck good forever. That's the deck I play. I'm going to veto anything that makes it less fun. I also think that, at least I can speak for myself, and I'm pretty confident that the top players are this way too. Part of what makes a good top player in Star Wars is that they don't necessarily just rely on pet decks. Like, we like variety, right? I like playing a lot of different decks. I think part of what makes someone a top player in Star Wars is that they can quickly learn a new deck. And I think the members of D&D are like that too. And I think above anything else, all the members of D&D are still like members of the community. We value fun, right? And now competitive stuff for us is fun, right? Like, honestly, the fun for a competitive player is winning to some degree, but it's also winning with new and different things, right? It's not just winning with the same deck again and again and again. And so I think, there's that check and balance with the 6 people on it, and also just the kind of good intentions of everyone who's on D&D. And also, the reality is that we hit the mark far less often than we think we're going to, and often I'm as surprised by what a good deck is after a new set comes out that I helped work on, right? In the sense that like stuff I think is going to be good isn't as good as I thought it was going to be. Stuff I thought was kind of weak might be stronger than I think it's going to be, and I think that's also just the nature of the beast with D&D is that like, you know, Magic has 15 full-time people working on every set, right? We got 6 volunteers putting in a couple hours each week, right? And so we're not really gonna be that great at predicting what's gonna be top after new sets come out, right? I mean, Thrawn's a great example. I thought Thrawn was gonna be good the first time it came out. It wasn't. After the errata, I thought it would be good enough, and it was too good, right? And so like, I think the number one goal in D&D is always what's fun. Like that's what Chris is always saying. Like Chris's number one thing he always pushes is this fun? Like will this make for more fun games? And that's really what we're going for. But yeah, you can rest assured with Zach that plus I like different decks than MHT and he likes different decks than Chris. So we'll log our horns on that regardless.
No two Star Wars cards players are gonna agree on that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
And yeah, what I told him was that if they knew a deck was going to be good, then they would nerf it in playtesting.
Yes. Yeah.
I
certainly don't release stuff that we're like, or we certainly don't conscientiously release a deck that I'm like, this deck's gonna be tier 1 and I'm gonna play it. I might we do release stuff that's tier 1 and it might be something I'm gonna play, but it's not gonna be like, oh, this is Drew's pet deck that we're pushing or whatever. Right. I mean, obviously we do want new stuff to be played, otherwise why are we making it to some degree?
And I will say, and I've heard this from others, and you can tell me if this is if I'm on the right track here, but like if you're involved in design, like you're thinking about cards in terms of 3 or 4 drafts behind
correct
what actually gets released. So
yeah.
So
we're
it
also
would be
talking
very
about
difficult.
set 21 is supposed to come out this summer, right? Yeah, 21. We've got forums for set 23 right now, right? Like that's not to say like, oh, we've master planned everything, but we have so many things floating around. Like, to be honest, I think being on D&D has hurt my abilities as a competitive player because I forget what cards do sometimes. I mean, like you said, there's so many different drafts of stuff that we go through and things that change and revisions. Like,
but yeah, that's why I decided to step away from playtesting, was that I was just so focused on, like, I was trying to figure out the current meta, and then I'm trying to play cards for the next thing, and I'm usually about 6 months behind on the meta anyway.
I've definitely had burnout before, like majors or whatever, where I'm like really working with the new allies and we're trying to come up with decks and playing on GIP, while at the same time having separate conversations about like the new set with D&D. It really can be too much at times. But again, first world problems. I'm not really complaining.
Oh yeah. No, it's obviously you wouldn't do it if it wasn't rewarding. But okay, let's look. So I did put out a call for questions on Slack. Let's see what people asked. So Tom asks, which player not currently on D&D would you most like to see join the team?
I think that's easy. Bastion. I mean, Bastion designs games for a living, right? I mean, what more could you ask for than arguably the best player in the game and a game designer to join D&D? I mean, the thing that really would matter most for D&D is someone who is really passionate, right? I mean, it's just there's so many conversations about so many. I mean, we've literally discussed, I think, every single objective that isn't good right now. Probably at some point or another, we've discussed a helper in the year that I've been here, right? And so there's lots of conversations. So you want someone who's just really actively involved, but assuming that whoever we pick is actively involved. Oh yeah, I mean Bastion. I mean, such a great mind for the game and games in general.
So this is a me question. I'll go back to Slack in a second. But sticking on the D&D stuff. One thing that's big about Star Wars CCG is the thematics and the lore and everything. And I mean, and I think that I think that the players community has continued to make a decent amount of pretty thematic stuff and delving deep on stuff. Is there somebody on design that has like a super deep knowledge of Star Wars lore?
Yes, more or less everyone who's not me. I'm unfortunately the token member of D&D who's do I admit this now on this podcast? I've never actually seen a Star Wars TV show. Like I've never seen an episode of The Mandalorian or anything. But good news, everyone else has. Ryan Jellison, super deep. I mean, he literally just like pulls stuff out, like the most obscure characters, in a quick response. Obviously, Chris, Kelly loves Star Wars. Taco Bill, who just joined, knows Star Wars really well. And actually, MHT, who I think we all think of as sort of a competitive top player, often mentioned something about like the Rebels cartoons. He was the designer of Zero Hour, and he really knew the theme that went with it really well. So yes, rest assured, all members of D&D besides me know Star Wars lore quite well. So
yeah, I don't know. I always wonder about that, like, because it does come like I can't tell. Sometimes I can't tell if it's like coming from a place of really good lore, or whether it's like we need something to do this. Let's search Wikipedia to see something that applies.
It's funny you say that. I do that a lot. In the sense of I've actually frequently gone to Wikipedia. There's some thing would we put out? I can't remember, some location, some system or site where it's like I'm looking for a system or site that does this. I'll just like look on Wikipedia. Oh, I think it's a system that we ended up not making for Watch Your Step. I was looking for like some smuggler related thing that could work. But no, generally people know it very well. Yeah.
Do you think that
I do go to Wikipedia a lot. Oh, not to give it away, but there's a whole theme based on, we'll say, first order stuff, where like I spent like an hour on Wikipedia just trying to find named characters with first order, named first order characters, basically.
Right. Because there's only so much.
Yeah.
There's only so much out there. Yeah. Now that
you missed the Decipher days where Decipher could just make up Imperials and like grab some dude in the office and take his picture and CGI him in and call him whoever Commander Merge or whatever.
Right. Yeah. That's somebody posted in Slack a list of the Jedi that survived Order 66, and I was most of them I knew, but there were a couple that I had to look up. One of them is I forget how to pronounce it, but it is Charles Soule, who wrote the Darth Vader comic and has written a bunch of comics and novels just spelled backwards. But
that's great.
But yeah, like just completely, like not the letters mixed up or anything, just totally spelled backwards. Okay, well that's good to know that there's some knowledge there. More questions. So let's go into. Joe sent a bunch of questions here.
Sure.
What do you think the most challenging and the most rewarding parts of being on design are?
Yeah, so I think the most challenging is definitely what I mentioned earlier, which is like or at least I'm frequently wrong about where I think power level of stuff is going to land. And that's hard, right? Because it's hard to spend a lot of time on something, and like especially like new objectives and themes we spend a lot of time on, and they go through playtesting. But again, playtesters are also volunteers; they have limited hours and availability, and then put it out, and then either have it be a dud or have it be so good that we have to errata it like a month later. Right? It's challenging, and it's really hard to hit that sweet spot of something that is competitive without being too good from the jump. And then the most rewarding part about D&D is definitely just the conversations with everyone in it. Like, we've had some really long threads, talking about how do we help this deck or that deck. It's really fun to go back and look at some cards that we've released, like, Vader is a good example, or your favorite Master Luke. And looking back at the threads, like what was the original idea? When did we kind of develop? That when you get in the sort of flow of creativity, it's really rewarding. So.
Okay. We'll rattle off. Okay, so let's talk. We can talk. You won some majors. And they were both in January.
Flukes.
So
I say they're flukes.
Flukes.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not something about that post-Christmas energy.
So perhaps in the sense that like they were both small majors, and I never really have taken a time off from the game, if you will. In the sense that like I'm always kind of just thinking about the game or playing the game, or part of the new allies group is that there's always someone I could talk with about deck ideas. So maybe that January thing is advantageous to me because it's like small groups coming off of Worlds. Maybe people weren't as engaged, but I kind of came in zeroed in. But honestly, the first one, Joe and Hayes and Kyle dropped because they had COVID, and Desai dropped from top 8 because he had to go back and coach basketball. And in the second one, it was the Swiss format where we didn't have a top 8. So I got into a final confrontation off of tiebreakers. There was like 4 or 5 people who were 7-3, and I just had the tiebreaker for it. So, I've never actually, not that this is not to discount my very strong opponents who I did play in, especially the top 8 in January, but it's just a full stacks feel in a normal, top 8 tournament. I haven't actually won one of those yet, so.
I think that I don't know. I think that the San Diego had a pretty stacked field.
It did, and like I was saying, I beat Greg and then Charlie and then Eric Hunter in the other one. So it's not that they're good, strong players, but the formats were just kind of different and weird, or people dropped, and I think if you want a real answer that isn't me trying to be sincerely modest, it's probably the fact that I kept focus going in when I think a lot of people might have.
Yeah, I definitely noticed. I mean, I don't know if it's just because I got better, but which I would hope is a factor. But I did notice, like in the first month of the OCS, that I did. I think I did 8 and 4 or something like that. But I did better than normal.
Yeah.
And I do credit that to me maintaining, and maybe some other people not. And then also people trying, like, kind of people starting the year fresh and trying maybe new things for themselves, whereas I was sticking with the stuff that I knew. But yeah, I can see that, where just pushing through past worlds and all that stuff. What is your biggest Star Wars goal?
Win worlds. Put it out there. I don't know if or when that's going to happen, but I want to be a world champion.
Okay, this sounds like one of Joe's questions that he would ask. What is the most important aspect of a Star Wars player, of a person in general? How are these two answers different, or are they the same?
Well, they're not going to be the same, because I think for Star Wars, so I'm going to take the Star Wars player question as someone who wants to be competitive and, a high level at the game. And I think the most important quality for that is just self-reflection, especially after losses, and being able to identify where you could have done better. I think very, very rarely do I lose in this game and I think to myself, well, I just couldn't win. This was a tough matchup and I had bad luck drawing cards. Drawing what few answers I might have had. I think most of the time when you lose, it's because you took a suboptimal line. And I think the ability to be really reflective and to look back at your games and to think about why you lost is the best quality for getting better. The most important quality in a person is sincerity. I really value sincerity above anything else. I think, people just being honest, both, telling the truth and also who they are, and also just kindness to each other. I think is just the most important thing. We're all suffering, we're all going through, life, and I think just being kind to each other is really important. And of course, those are important qualities for people in the community, but I think obviously they're different than the qualities you need to excel at a strategy card game. So,
what are you never willing to compromise on?
in Star Wars or life?
I don't know. Joe's asking the questions now.
Joe is probably more curious what my answers about in life, what I'm never willing to compromise on. In Star Wars, let me answer Star Wars first. What I would never be willing to compromise on is, I would say that I want my decks. I want decks that have a fighting chance all the time. I'm not saying I would never play like a Y4O because I would never say that here. I mean, I might pull out a Y4O in a top 8 sort of environment, but I would probably never play like a Y4O in like a Swiss tournament. I just don't want to play a deck that is rock, paper, scissors. In life, what am I never willing to compromise on? Um, I think being honest to myself is the most important thing, right? I think just knowing who I am and why I do what I do is really important to me, and that sort of self-reflection is something I don't want to compromise on. It's important to me that I can articulate the reasons why I do things, basically. Okay.
What was your favorite Star Wars weekend?
Favorite Star Wars weekend? Probably Worlds. This last Worlds here in Atlanta. I was disappointed by my results, in part because I totally blew a game that could have given me a chance to make top 8. But the weekend was just incredible. It was here in Atlanta. I helped organize it. I was kind of the primary organizer for the hotel and the event space, and everyone came in town for it. And we spent basically a whole week at Kessling's doing a boot camp to get ready for it, and then follow that up with just hanging out with everyone for the whole weekend. Was incredible. I was happy that I made it happen. And I could contribute to the community in that way.
Any recommendations for somebody who might be organizing a major that hasn't before or anything?
Yeah, you just do it. I mean, certainly from the PC, you just tell them you want to do it, and they're going to be like, "Awesome, thank you." Basically, as long as it's in the calendar, like
right.
I think they got maybe 2024 is already figured out, but. And then beyond that, with the event space, I've learned with event space stuff, you just got to email them nonstop. Like, email, ask a question, and hear back, set a reminder, email them again 3 days later, right? I mean, when you're coordinating that with someone at a hotel, you got to kind of stay on top of them, basically.
Without answering community or friends, why should someone play Star Wars CCG?
Because it is, like we were talking about earlier, just the perfect blend of a chess-like game that has some variance to it. Right. So it really is a game that is super rewarding with learning the strategy, while at the same time having interesting variants so that no two games are the same.
Why isn't there a dark side mirror to moving to attack position?
It would probably be too good. And well, there is. It's all powered weapons, right? Like you could play that in like a tie deck or whatever. That's pretty strong. But I can't imagine it won't be too good in court. Are any of those guys Corellians? Isn't Dengar a Corellian?
Dengar is a Corellian. I don't know if he's a Corellian by rule.
I think he is. We normally like species by rule. But yeah, we'll go with too good in court.
Okay, cool. Anything in development that you can talk about that you're excited about?
Unfortunately, I don't think I'm allowed to talk about things without explicit permission from Chris Kelly.
Okay.
I think I alluded to it earlier, so this would not be in the next set. But so I've never really actually had like an objective that I've built from the ground up on my own that's been put out in the set. Not on my own. No one does anything on their own. But the way we like to do objectives is either like a design pod, which is like people who aren't in D&D put it together, or one member of D&D basically puts it all out there, and then people start giving feedback. Okay. And we actually recently coded both a dark side and a light side one that I did. And I'm pretty excited, hopefully down the line, see if those end up making it. So, okay. Objectives. But yeah, otherwise, specific stuff for Set 21, marketing's gotta okay those. So
let's see. Coffee or Red Bull?
Coffee. And I got nothing but a sincere answer. Obviously, my GIMP name is CoffeePass. My GIMP name is CoffeePass, by the way, because when I made a GIMP account originally, like a long time ago, I think so. Even though I got back in 2020, I knew kind of that GIMP existed, and I made an account. Literally, the two things on my desk were coffee and my passport, and I can't type out passport all the way, so I drew a CoffeePass. But Red Bull is filthy, so definitely coffee.
Are you a morning person, and why?
Yes, I'm very much a morning person, partially because of coffee. I am a morning person. I normally play all my like games in the morning, either my OCS games or testing with like some teammates, like Sam Yoshi is a morning person, so we often play in the morning. Or Bastion, Bastion and I used to play together a lot in the morning. I do not like being on a computer at night. I just feel like I spend all day on the computer ready for work. So I ideally want to be off my computer in the evening, and I like to read, and reading is really important to me. That's how I unwind in the evening. So I want that buffer of a couple hours where I'm just kind of mentally unwinding.
Well, if you like to read at the end of the day, I know how you could maybe be better with your Star Wars lore.
Yeah, I was actually thinking the other day I want to read more Star Wars books. I did read, well, I know you don't like it, but like I read like the original Thrawn trilogy when I was like a kid. I like what I've read before, so maybe I should.
So so what I would recommend, since you are a design person, where I think the most opportunity for design of obscure canon characters. I'm not saying that the book is like really, really good. It's kind of hit and miss, but from a certain point of view.
From a certain point of view.
Is it's so they did one for A New Hope and one for Empire Strikes Back.
Okay, yeah, I see.
And it is like every single character in every single moment of every single movie.
And this is like, canon.
Yeah, and it's canon. So it's like it's like the old Tales books, but like on steroids.
Okay.
Because it's like so. Yeah, and I listened to it on tape, and I don't know that was the best way of doing it, because it was like, every little story, but it would be a good, like, digestible, sit down and read it. I'd
love to make a character out of Dex Tyree. That sounds great.
I think actually one of the characters that is not represented that I would love to see is actually in from a certain point of view is Akmina, the bartender from the holiday special, B. Arthur's character.
Sure. Okay.
And so she's technically canon.
You've had player cards, Kindle. You could make her. So
I don't think I've had any player cards where I had that much like availability. And also now that
Taggy's first name is Cassio. Interesting.
I did not know that off the top of my head. I know. Do you know what Admiral Ozzel's first name is?
No, because I'm looking at the New Hope one.
Admiral Ozzel's first name is Kendall.
Really?
Yes.
That's cool.
And then Conan Mahdi.
Yes, I did see Conan
because
Mahdi.
George Lucas was on Conan O'Brien and just decided to name him at that point.
Love it.
But yes, yes. But I think the other issue with Akmina is that there's not really an image for her.
Well, that doesn't stop us these days.
Well, yeah, but again, as a player card, you're more limited.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think all of my player cards have either been this specific card, or I do have a V Lite that's in progress. I get the player cards to a point, and then they don't go anywhere. So I don't know about that, but anyway, let's go ahead. Let me think if I had. Oh, well, first of all, I feel like I'm burying the lead. Why were you in China?
My wife is from China, and I had actually been working full-time remote before the pandemic, before it was cool.
Okay.
And so we had gone out there for Chinese New Year to spend a couple weeks with her family before we traveled around Asia a little bit more. And a couple weeks became a year. So.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Was it like I feel like the little bits that I've heard is that the pandemic was kind of rough in China.
Well, it actually wasn't that bad. So we were in a complete lockdown for like 3 weeks. Like we couldn't leave the apartment. We didn't have like our door welded shut or whatever kind of horror stories people share. But you couldn't leave except to get food. They brought the food up. But then after that, like honestly, one of the reasons we stayed is because as things were starting to go downhill in the U.S., things were getting back to normal there. So the lockdown there was into January, February 2020, and then things in the U.S. started to kind of go down in like March and April. By summer 2020 in China, we were traveling around the country, like visiting different cities. Yeah, and I think it's partially because they had such a stringent lockdown.
Right.
Kept it that way.
Yeah. So what were you in a part of China that was particularly like that was hit hard, or was it?
No, not disproportionately, just the whole country locked down basically.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. I guess when you don't have I guess there are certain like Anakin said, if the system works, right?
Right. Yeah. No, they have. That's the thing is honestly because they had certain powers, they could lock it all down and stop the spread. And this was obviously an earlier variant of it that was less infectious. Just a lot of different things.
Yeah. That's interesting. And
the big difference is that also there, everyone basically lives in apartments, so it's much easier to keep people contained in the spot because there's one central entrance, right?
Oh,
it's not like people living in houses spread out like in the US.
Right. Yeah, interesting stuff. So let's go ahead and move into the Pivo questionnaire.
Sure.
So I don't know if you listen to these, but basically this is a questionnaire that I ask everybody.
Yeah.
Interpret the questions however you want. Some of them don't make sense.
Perfect.
But they do mirror each other. So if I say, what's the thing you like? Don't say anything but the thing I don't like. But otherwise, interpret the questions however you want. What is your favorite card?
My favorite card, I was thinking about this because I know it's going to be asked. I'm going to say Watch Your Step. I love kind of everything that Objective is doing. I love that it takes, otherwise underplayed characters, makes you kind of find a way to make them work together. I love playing the interrupts from Lost Pile, kind of the trickiness that goes with it. I think it's just a really cool design.
You gonna do anything to make it playable?
I've tried, as one of those examples of the things in D&D where, been off the mark. I thought the combo effect we made was going to really push it up to be competitive, but wasn't enough. And it's something we're always talking about making better. But it's something I definitely really like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely I mean, it leads. It's pretty straightforward. Pretty straightforward design space. Just make a better Mara or a better Corran, and
yeah, exactly. We can always there's clear ways we could definitely boost it. I want to try to boost it in the tricky, sneaky way that it is currently plays, right? It'd be fun to make some cool interrupts specifically for it. I've had some success with it. I literally won by one, but I won a OCS playoff game against Mike with it. But yeah, it could be better for sure.
Yeah. I've been thinking about building it because there's a few players, and I don't want to I'm a mediocre player myself, but there's a few players that I play with regularly who I'm like, a tier above. I'm a tier better player than them, so I feel like maybe that's an opportunity for me to play a deck that maybe isn't quite as powerful.
Yeah, it's fun. It's very rewarding. A lot of decisions to make.
I always say I'm going to get a bumper sticker that says my other car is a patrol craft because I love playing Palace Raiders.
With Shadow Collective being less good than it used to be, it might be really viable. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. Maybe. Okay, good. The original, the first half recording just popped up in the chat. Okay. So that means that we're good. And like I said, I still have the backup recording, even if we didn't have that. What is your least favorite card?
probably Imperial Decree V, because basically every time I built a deck, I have to think to myself, can this beat We Have a Plan and or Asteroid Sanctuary? Both decks that are not commonly played. And so do I need to like spend this 10% or less than 10% chance that I face that deck, made up percentages, and play this otherwise bad card in my 60 card list? And I hate that little mini meta game. Like, to be honest, that's why we have shields, or it's a problem with especially WAP, where it's like, why is this deck so good that we have to make a main deck counter for it? But then if you don't have, if you, it's only good against that deck. Like, I just don't like that little mini meta game that goes with Decree V.
Same thing with Relatively Unprotected, I think.
Right. That at least has the excuse of being Destiny 7. But I agree with you. And that it's, but also, TTO, you can at least like engage with by trying to blow up their Death Star 2, for example. Right. WAP is frustrating. I guess maybe the card I like the least is WAP. Sorry, Robbie. I really love Robbie. But maybe it's just WAP that I don't like, because it's like both uninteractive with their damage, but then you never get to draw Battle Destiny against them ever again, basically.
Yeah.
And I don't like that the answer to it is Decree V. I think the answer should either be a shield or the effect that makes WAP playable, which is a virtual card, should like limit the damage or something.
And Robbie's a great guy. I think that he has a lot of incorrect opinions. So. Yeah, not the like problematic type of incorrect opinions.
We all do.
I disagree with him about a lot of things about the game and a lot of things when it comes to Star Wars media. What types of cards stimulate your creativity?
Types of cards that stimulate my creativity. It's a good question. I like and I think we need to design more of these, like just powerful interrupts that don't have like a clear place to play. So like Close Call might be a little too powerful, but something along those lines. Like, I just love like interrupts that are kind of open-ended. It's like, this is really good, but when does it slot into a deck? Fall of a Legend is a card.
Fall of a Legend was what I was thinking.
That's like that too. Like Fall of a Legend Virtual is like really powerful. Like an interesting mix of abilities on a high Destiny. Often a 61st card. When does that become a card I actually want in my main 60?
Yeah, and that's just those interrupts are especially interesting if they're low Destiny, I think. Like if it's a high Destiny interrupt, then it's like, yeah, you can play it no matter what. But and like
that's a design space that like specifically Chris and I have talked about that we want to push more on, which is like powerful low Destiny interrupts. There's really not that many. I mean, there's Close Call and its Mirror. But then besides those, like we should design more of those, because I think I like cards like that where they're always something you would consider in a deck, and it's like, well, which decks do I put Fall of a Legend in, and which ones don't I put Fall of a Legend in, and like how does that kind of texture of the deck change?
For me, that's like Clash. Like when I'm playing a light side mains deck that needs. Like, it needs as many cards to be 4, 5, 6s as possible, because I've got so many ones in there. Like, throwing in a 3, even if it is a game-winning card like Clash, is like, oh man. Or especially if it's like, do I want to play 2? Like, oh man.
Right.
Yeah, it's a tough decision. That's interesting.
And I love cards like that, and I think we should make more cards like that.
What types of cards make you just want to quit the game?
Cards make you. Well,
sounds like pod racing.
Yeah, the cop out answer is nothing, in the sense that like I always have the mindset of whatever is playable, and we're all playing in the same game, and so if I can play it, you can play it. But generally uninteractive, like purely uninteractive stuff. I think right now in the current game, it's like all in space decks are just kind of, they're certainly not as bad as like what pod racing used to be, or Senate used to be, or all the myriad of problematic stuff that Decipher had. But like when you flip up Y40, like half the time it's like, cool, we're going to do a math problem together, right? We're just going to figure out, can I damage you more than you damage me with your retrieval? And like, I'm not going to interact with you in space. I'm either going to try to run away from you or not even go to space, right? And I think Y40 is kind of the biggest defender of that right now.
So that's actually, let's step away from the Pivo questionnaire and step back to the design space questionnaire. Something that I think about a lot with the game, whether it's for my personal play or whether it's for like what I think, if I have a player card, am I gonna, how is it gonna interact or whatever. So Star Wars cards, it's very important that we have space, I think. Like,
agreed.
Starships and X-Wings and TIE fighters and stuff. That's what makes Star Wars Star Wars. It's one of the things.
Yep.
So having the 2 theater system is a good thing in that sense. But I think part of the reason that the all-in space decks are a problem is that so much of the meta is a bunch of people on the ground with 2 ships.
Yeah, and I think so. That's the.
So how do you balance that? How do you fix that?
Yeah, I don't know how you fix it in what we currently have as a setup for the game. And to be honest, it's not like if you reset, you would be able to do it from where Decipher's at either. Because
it's a
I just think
fundamental...
of Decipher that I was telling one of my favorite decks to play was X-Wings with S-foils, right? It's not like, you could just throw in a random ship up there and fight that or whatever. And so, so the reason why ground, we basically have just kind of, it has to be one or the other. And ground, we've just kind of accepted that it's okay to have a lot of heavy ground decks that splash space. And you could uproot everything and go the other way around, which is have a bunch of heavy space decks that splash ground. But we just kind of don't, like, the reason why that doesn't work is because characters can go both ways, but ships can't. So what you can do is you can splash a ship that has passenger capacity and then put Boba Fett or Rey or whoever on it, or they could alternatively go to the ground. But an X-Wing can only ever go to space, right? And that's the issue, is that, like, unless you, like, redid the whole game where you could have ships flying around on the ground, like, they do in the movies sometimes or whatever, you can't really, once a deck reaches a critical mass of space, it kind of just has to be like, well, I'm not even going to bother on the ground, right? Because your single Emperor is not going to be able to stand up to light side mains or even old allies or whatever. And so you kind of reach the point where it's like, well, this might as well just be an all-in space deck. And that's kind of where you're at with that. It's challenging, and I think about it a lot because I do fully agree with you. It's like, I don't like the all-in space decks, but the game would be worse if we didn't have something that represented X-Wings flying around in space as a viable deck.
Right.
It's just really challenging to think, how can we make it so other decks can interact with that deck in a way that the game is, like, engaging and interesting, and not just like, we're going to do a math problem.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, to me, the answer is more balanced decks, more decks that set up in both theaters.
And you'll see that obviously D&D, that's what we push, right? I mean, like, say what you will, and I think, as a quick aside, that's why I think light side is generally stronger right now, because there's so many more of those decks that are really good. Old Allies, QMC, No Idea, 0 Hour, Diplo. Light side has lots of decks that have a balanced setup between space and ground. Dark has less of them for sure. But that's easily fixed, right? That's what
just make Court better.
Exactly. Honestly, yes. Make Court better or make entanglements better or whatever. You can pick what those decks are. But the question would be, how can you take a deck like Y40 and give it like a good ground package, that's a lot more challenging because the nature of space decks is they're very card hungry, and you end up basically having, what we call like the 85 card deck problem.
Right.
Like we actually have a deck in playtesting right now. It's a platform that has this problem. Broadly speaking, it's trying to do something from the prequels trilogy, and it's like you want to have Dooku, and you want to have Nemodians, you want to have battle droids, you want to have all their cool ships and systems and sites, but like we're restricted to 60 cards, right?
Right.
And the thing is that space ends up being so card intensive that it's like really hard to make a deck that's strong at multiple systems also be good at sites, right? Like all those light side decks I just mentioned, besides Diplo, basically only put out one system to begin with, and so they're able to be strong in both space and ground because they can flex their characters between the system and the related sites. It's much more difficult to imagine like a deck with a bunch of systems and X-Wings also having a good ground package. But it's an interesting design thing and definitely something we talk about. And like, Chris Kelly specifically has said a couple times he wants to make like a super cool, badass, Black Squadron, like Death Star Squadron, Vader and the TIEs flying around the galaxy, menacing people deck, right? So it's not something that we rule out. It's just we got to be very careful with how we design them.
Yeah. Well, and also I will say, the other reason that light side is better at this stuff that we're talking about is Honshuing the Falcon.
For sure.
Because Honshuing the Falcon is one card that and you can put your core light side characters on it to add to your destinies or to add destinies, but it's one card that like most games you can if you want to. It's not necessarily the best option, but you're not going to lose 15 force if you just deploy Honshui and the Falcon to a system.
For sure. It's very, very powerful. And honestly, it's very relevant. It's come up recently. We've been talking about it a lot, especially with the competitive balance team, specifically Honshui and the Falcon. We basically have three options, which is that's just what it is. And that's like light side's thing is that it gets to splash with Honshui and the Falcon. We can errata Honshui and the Falcon, so it's not as good as it currently is. Or we can give Darkside a similar option, right? Like a ship that basically is as good as Honshu and the Falcon. And, by default, if we do nothing, the first thing will be what happens, which is it is what it is. But I agree that Honshu and the Falcon definitely shifts that. But also, I mean, you talk about a deck like Diplo, it starts with Tantive. Old Ally starts with Falcon. 0 Hour gets Hera and Ghost, Phantom Ghost. But the point is that like those decks have space set up for them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I personally, for what it's worth, I think that the answer is to give Darkside a better splashable space.
I think so too.
I think that because there's basically even if it's like something like Verge that is almost exclusively in space. When I play my There's Good at Him that is almost exclusively on the ground, but I have Honshui and the Falcon in there, it's a game. Whereas
and I think that's more. I think it'd be more interesting to give Darkside something comparable, so that Darkside can have a game versus Y4O, as opposed to just like if we errata Honshui and the Falcon, then There Is Good at Him versus Verge would be less of a game.
Yeah. So. Like as opposed to Bring Him Before Me, having just if you just have Sith Infiltrator, like you're probably not. Like I played Bring Him Before Me for 6 months without deploying Sith Infiltrator once. I added the Star Destroyer combo cards.
I think Bring Him Before Me is like a secret space deck, to be honest, because it's so powerful to put them all out with Sith Infiltrator depending on the matchup.
Well, you're a better player than me. I will say that once I added the Star Destroyers, the combo Star Destroyers, then you have a real space package, and you can.
There are a lot of power.
You can do things that you wouldn't have
egregiously
done
lacking
otherwise.
passenger space, but yeah.
Well, usually I just put it in. I'm lucky if I can find one character to put on there, but you're not going to get overflowed. But anyway, where were we on the questions? Let's see. What is your favorite Star Wars term?
My favorite Star Wars term. It's funny because I actually get made fun of a lot because I use magic terms when I'm talking about Star Wars often. So I'm always talking about tutoring cards when I should be saying uploading or downloading. But uh, I don't know. I'm pausing, and there's a lot of good ones. I'm not thinking of anything. I don't know. I like Hujixing and Gicking. I've Hujix out of a battle. Yeah.
Um, I'm gonna come back to this. I'm gonna put it at the end because
Okay.
it's a Mandalorian spoiler.
Okay.
That makes me think of that made me think of something actually that has to do with what you were saying about space decks earlier. And then my story about using a magic term inappropriately. Back when I played when I was super into it, putting as much time into Magic as I put into Star Wars now.
Mm-hmm.
And I was an F&M level player, but I did okay. But somebody was like saying that Burger King fries were really good.
Mm-hmm.
And just instinctually I was like, maybe in limited.
I like that.
But yeah, anyway, because that's all I was one track mind at the time.
And Burger King fries are not good.
Yeah, Burger King fries are not good. Burger King fries are not good. Yeah, I was talking to my wife about it because she was like, man, I've been liking Wendy's fries a lot. And I was like, Wendy's fries are the worst fries that I will eat.
Yeah,
Like if it's
that's
any
fair.
worse than Wendy's fries, if it's Burger King fries, I'm just
Burger
not going to
King
eat
fries.
them. But like McDonald's fries are better, Five Guys fries are better, Shake Shack fries are better. Like all the places that I'll actually eat the fries. What opponent's deck do you love to see?
What opponent's deck do I love to see? So I mean, I could name, something like combat or something that isn't particularly good. So let me think of a competitive deck that's actually pretty good that I could say. I'll take a controversial answer. I love to see Ralops. I think I can beat Ralops almost every time.
Interesting.
I think people who come in and play Ralops have like a high level of confidence with the deck, and I feel like I've had a lot of reps with it with a lot of different decks, and I don't play a deck at a major or in a competitive environment if I don't think to myself, how can this beat Ralops, basically. So I feel like I like to see Ralops.
Yeah, I know what you're saying there because when I'm playing court, a lot of times I'm happy to see mains.
Yeah.
Even though it should be like on paper, it should be, or actually There's Good in Him versus Bring Him Before Me should be not favorable for There's Good in Him.
Right.
But I know the matchup so well.
Right.
And a lot of times my opponent doesn't know the matchup because I'm the only one in the world that plays There's Good in Him.
Yeah.
So
it's a combination of knowing matchups and also because stuff like Ralops really has answers to stuff like Rebel Barrier or Dodge. Like I know my tricks are going to be live. I know what their game plan is. It's like that, like you're saying.
Right.
You know the matchup really well.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. You know the matchup, and you got to play. You got to play the game.
Exactly.
I think Ralops is sometimes I think it's more fair than it used to be. It seems like they're whittling away at it enough that what opponent's deck do you hate to see? Y4 Ops?
Y4 Ops. Well, the thing is that it kind of on the other end of Ralops in the sense that I also don't play decks unless I can beat Y4 Ops in the sense that I'll add the second battleground site and a search and destroy to my hunt down V so I can beat Y4 Ops or but yeah, anything where I feel like it's gonna be non-interactive, WAP, Y4O, hidden base, I like to have maximum skill in the games that we're playing. And when you face that hidden base deck, it's there's only one route of what my deck can do, right? There's not gonna be a lot of interesting back and forth necessarily.
Yeah. I Travis beat me with hidden base the other day, so I'm sensitive to that.
But again, those decks are also at least the charm of the game too. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm like knives out, let's kill Y4O. That's not going to happen, right? Like part of the game is having those decks that play differently from everything else. They're only problematic if they become like a huge percentage of the meta, which they're certainly not.
What I think is, you bring up Hidden Base and Y4O, they're similar decks. But what I think is interesting with Hidden Base is it often has like another path to it. Like it's not like Y4O is pretty much I'm putting all my resources in space and I'm going to be good at fighting in space. Hidden Base is a dedicated space deck that doesn't win its fights in space.
Right, because it puts out like 5 systems, right? So it has to have other like it can wait, not
right.
It has to be doing other things because it can't cover all 5 systems, whereas Y4O can more realistically cover 3 systems.
Yeah, it can wait or hyper escape or whatever, and it's just and it also just plays. I like that because it has a million sites out, so you're activating like, even if you're playing against it, you're activating like 25.
Yeah, you get to play your game, but the thing is, you're not playing your game against a normal deck. Is the issue, right?
Yeah, it's just it's I feel like it's, even though it's non-interactive, it's in an interesting way as opposed to like TTO or Y4 Ops. I feel like both of those kind of, it's just I'm dedicating all my resources to this one theater and I'm going to I'm going to out damage you.
Yeah, and I think
it's a little more complicated.
It's okay to have something like a Hidden Base in the game for sure. Like that's not it's only a problem if it became like dominant, which obviously
right. Yeah. It would be like, if I remember my Magic, it would be like a dredge deck.
Exactly. Yeah. Which dredge has had many cards banned for it becoming too good at times. So
what Star Wars job would you like to try?
Star Wars job would I like to try? I think I would like to be what is Vanden Willard's job? I want to be Commander Willard. Yeah, I want to be Vanden Willard for a day. I want to be a Alderaanian spy from the House Organa. Is that right?
And he's what? Did you say he's a commander?
Yeah, I think he's got
some kind of rank in the rebel military.
I want to save Alderaanians to the use pile once per game. I want to 3PO back my cards. Like I think that's a good job to have.
What Star Wars job would you want to avoid?
I'm fairly confident, mainly because I'm not a very good driver, that I would not be a very good pilot either. So I'm going to pass on any sort of flying.
Yeah, I'm not a great driver either. Somebody pointed out to me that in the Star Wars universe that flying a starfighter is actually a lot closer to driving a car than like flying a jet fighter.
Yeah.
And so it's like that's why you can have like kind of overweight fighter pilots.
I think you have overweight normal pilots, right? I don't know. But regardless,
I don't know. Tom Cruise is not overweight, so
I mean, I'm cognizant enough that I'm a bad driver that I think I've become a good driver, if that makes sense. Like I think to myself, I'm very focused when I'm driving because I know I'm not a great driver. But I would not want to be a fighter. Like Baron Suitenfeld would shoot me down in a heartbeat.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, that's the thing about being a fighter pilot is you have like
got people shooting at you
every time you fly out there. You got a pretty good chance of not making it. And just lastly, what would you like to see happen with the future of the game?
I just wanted to keep existing more than anything else. We have such a great community, and that's what matters. And I want it to be a community that still is gathered together around the game, right? So I know prior to the previous reset, we were getting events that had 16 people, majors that were barely larger than locals. And I hope we never reach that point again, right? I care about the community. I also care about playing the game at hopefully a continuously high level. So my biggest hope is that we just keep this going, right? I think right now we're in a pretty good spot, and I hope that we can continue to have the level of engagement that we have now.
Yeah. We've definitely got a great amount of engagement, great amount of excitement for the game, and honestly the game is, thanks to you guys at Dungeons and Dragons,
despite us at Dungeons and Dragons,
you guys, I think honestly it might be just because like this is the first time that I've been like halfway decent at the game, but like I really do think that the game is healthier. Like there's like although there are the occasional decks that break the rules, the typical decks it is about controlling sites and it is about fighting. And I think that's what the game should be about.
Yeah.
And representing a lot of the lore, a lot of great stuff. So
yeah, and that's what we aim to do, is just keep it fun, right? And that's what's important. Just keep it fun for everyone.
All right. Well, Drew, thanks a lot for coming on. I think that is a good place to wrap things up.
Thank you for having me. It's been so much fun.
All right. And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time, good luck, have fun, and no reverts. This podcast is a production of the KendallCast Podcast Network. If you'd like to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/KendallCast or make a direct donation through the PayPal link at kendallcast.ninja. Thanks for listening.